Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Before I get into this video, I'd like to ask you all to please leave a like or comment on my video and consider subscribing to my channel. Now, for today's video, I am going to be making a massive discussion. Now, that is number one what I do most of the time, but let's start talking about something really peculiar, and that is going to be the current format of the battleships. Now, battleship values were about 7 billion the with the blueprint included. Right now, I am not going to include the blueprint price in the battleship because blueprint prices have skyrocketed, and that's particularly because of the patches that came in over the past 2 weeks, where the devs effectively tried to reduce the ISK movement through the game. And when they did this, they actually made a massive buzz for people to actually spend Plex in the game. And players started to buy Plex from them, so it has improved their market share a little bit because a lot of players wanted to get into the end game instantly. So they started spending a lot of Plex started moving onto the market, and these debris that didn't move super fast started flying out and getting sold so quickly that their prices got ridiculous. Now, the Rattlesnake is the most popular battleship. Its debris maxes out at around 189 million just over 200 million per debris. That's what I've seen the maximum. At current, the maximum on the first page is 189 million. So yeah, it's really expensive. Now let me go open the debris. Okay, so that is the first part of this whole story, and that is going to be the elite debris. So the elite debris price has shifted up quite heavily. Let me just open this to show you. Now the lowest price debris is 40 million ISK, making it one of the cheaper debris to actually have. Now obviously with the difference of 40 to 200 mil at maximum, that makes these blueprints really expensive. And the easiest way for you to get your blueprint is actually to farm up the dead spaces in your sector or region until you have maximum ISK. Now let's go into it a little bit more in detail and talk about some of the other problems. Well, here we go. When it came to the debris, the other problem with them was they were dropping really slow from activities. So while in the past dead spaces weren't so easy to find, you could actually count on getting at least one a day or two a day if you had a wide enough area to rat across. But at current, dead spaces only spawn one a day or two a day if you are very, very lucky. If you are ratting in a wide area, you could luckily get two or three in a day, and a wide area is about 20 to 30 sectors. In the past, that wide area was about 4 or 5 sectors, and that's when you could go for really heavy returns on dead spaces. Now, to top that off, the loot drops within dead spaces had been reduced, so the drops from each of the ships became smaller and smaller, meaning that you need to get more and more debris across more and more dead spaces, making it a slower task. So it forced players to do maybe 30 or 40 dead spaces a day. It forced players to buy up more and more materials, and altogether all of these things actually impacted the endgame market for that particular purpose. Now, I know that this isn't the best way to describe it, and this isn't everything that happened, but that is the basics of what happened. Now, moving on, the next thing to note would be why these prices are currently so prevalent. The demand with the Plex started to force players to get ISK very quickly, and the Plex price went up very, very fast because a lot of players wanted to get Plex as quickly as possible when the price started to rise. And the price right now, if I'm correct, is just a million or just over a million. Let me double check that. It's just under a million at 920,000 per Plex. Now I'm going to need Plex in the next 10 days, so I really need to start stocking up on my ISK. Whew. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a long one. So these things actually impacted the price of battleships. Most people were buying Plex to buy a battleship because it was easy to trade for the ISK, and everybody needs it at least once every 30 days. So this year drove up the price of Plex really, really high. It forced more and more players to buy it, and the slow rate of resources coming into the market forced their prices to go higher. People started placing orders at higher levels, so they started to beat the previous order by 10 mil or by 1 or 2 mil a time, and this forced the prices to start increasing higher and higher. And once all the previous orders were off the market, everybody started going at that maximum order, and it pushed it up past 50 to 60 million. That pushed up even further to 100, pushing it up all the way to almost 200 million per Garista debris. And that's how the Garista debris really took off. Now, beyond all of that, these are other reasons why they're so expensive. On average, to make a battleship blueprint, it takes 3 tries. So that means that you are more than likely going to spend a large fee just to make one blueprint. So in the past, the value of about 1.4 billion to 2.1 billion was actually a very fair price for the blueprint. And right now it's going up past 12 billion because the price of those debris have gone that high. And it's all called market driven economies, so that's why this year is happening within the game. The next thing to note on that entire situation, that supply and demand, obviously you have to understand it to understand the price. The next thing to note was the actual price of manufacturing the ships came down drastically. A ton of resources flooded the market at JITA and the other ICTs in HISEC, along with a lot of planetary materials dropping in price. This dropped that price of about 5 billion for the raw materials to around 3.6 billion. Plus the skills of players reduces that cost even further. So from 3.6 billion, you might be somewhere near 3 billion if you are effective enough. If you have 100% effective production on your ship, you might have a cost of around 2.5, 2.7, 2.9. I'm not 100% sure, but that's where your cost should be for building one of these ships. It is quite cheap, it is quite effective at that price, and when you do that there, you're going to end up with a much smaller figure. Now, with that entire cost being where you at for your ship, what is the next thing that came up on purchasing and buying up the materials for your ship? Well, that is the 600 million that is needed for production. That is a constant price, everybody pays it no matter what. So you add that to your overall fee, and that's where you end up with the fair price for a ship being around 4.5 to 5 billion per battleship. So those are the fair prices on the ship. Now let's move on to the next aspect of this entire ratio of the battleships. Players started losing battleships, and that's because there was a rush to kill the battleships. Now players poorly fitted out their battleships. They went with high DPS builds and solid fighting builds instead of balancing them out a little bit at the start. Remember, I always do a balance type build. It has high DPS, high resistance. It's in between on both functions. It's never just pure DPS or pure shield. Actually, wait, some of them are pure shield, but the reason for the shield is so that it can do DPS over time. Now, that's how a lot of players lost their rattlesnakes. They put sentry drones on their ships without any skills for the large drones. That forced them to keep the low range power on the drones, and the drones weren't effectively able to destroy small ships. So that's how they lost their big ships right off the get-go. Then moving on in the next few weeks following that, players started to try and pull out the PvP battleships. That's the Balgon and Vindicator. And the Balgon and Vindicators weren't really being destroyed that much, but instead they were being used to destroy rattlesnakes. Rattlesnake pilots generally didn't put on any shield tank, and it cost them in terms of battles with those other ships. They had the most amount of range and the highest DPS. They could win most of those battles if they played correctly, but due to them not being able to regen shields or not having shield regen items, they lose most of their effective DPS as the ships close range, and then they also lose again when their power grid goes away and that's how they were falling very quickly in battle. Okay, so that's the reason for Grista debris being as high as it is. I was just explaining it. Moving on, at the moment, a lot of these battleships have become effective to use, and that's because players have started to skill out into the weak points of these battleships. Players know that, for example, if you're going with a Nightmare, its weak point is it doesn't have a lot of DPS. So if you want it to be the most effective, you either improve its tank so that it's much greater, or you improve its DPS from the lasers. So you research some large laser skills so you can output a nice DPS when fighting. Now, Nightmares are very effective. They can take on almost all the levels of anomalies. They can even take on T10 Inquisitor. Now, T10 Dead Space is a different story. Some players might be able to do it. I'm not sure if all players can. Okay, whew, this is such a difficult one to complete. Now, moving on from the Dead Space level with the Nightmares, you have Vindicators and Balgons. Vindicators and Balgons are fantastic PvP ships. They are one of the most effective. They can take out gate camps really fast, and they have a habit of defending stations at the moment. So players who deploy Capsulia outposts generally back them up with a Balgon, Vindicator, or a Nightmare. So if you do end up fighting one of those stations and one of these big ships pop out, you know that they're coming to defend. And if your range from the station isn't far enough, they can close in on you very, very easily and rip your fleet to shreds. Okay, so that is the basics on how they were being used, where they're being used. Now the negatives on the battleships. A lot of players who have outfitted their battleships to give them premium usage have only outfitted it for one particular activity. Unlike running my battle cruiser right now, which I could even run in a PvP situation, they generally are outfitted purely for PvE or PvP. And a pure PvP fit doesn't have Weber fires, while a pure a pure PvP fit doesn't run Weber fires, while a pure PvE fit runs Weber fires. And this makes a major difference. Like you saw with me against Randy, my particular build over there was to keep myself as wrapped up as possible. So I wasn't going to ever lose rep on my shields. And it did work out quite well for me. It did give me quite a lot of shield, and it did make a big difference in that fight. If this year were to continue on with the players currently in the game, if they used a similar tactic, they'd only be able to fight big ships. That's battle cruisers and battleships. But most PvE blockades are frigates. And if you're going to take on frigates with something like Balgon or a Nightmare, you run webs, you run neutralizers, and you run scrams, because you don't want them to be able to run. You just want to stop them and smash them as fast as possible, and that's how you generally win. Okay, so that's going to be about it on the battleships. I hope that you did enjoy, and you know what, find me on Discord, find me in the game, join me for mission and encounters this weekend. I'm running through them again. As you know, that's going to be my weekend activity, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Thank you all for watching. Have a good day.